Welcome to a special program, Man of Peace. Nobel Laureate ElBaradei speaks. He joins us today from Vienna, where he was the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, and later he was Vice President of Egypt. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2005, and he has constantly worked in all his life for world peace and prosperity. Whether it is in the IAEA or later, even after his leaving the IAEA, he has been dedicating his life to a world without nuclear weapons and use of atoms for peace. In the last 20 years or so, I have learned to turn to him if there are game-changing developments in the world. We talked last year when we talked about that situation at that time. Since then, there have been even more game-changing developments in the world. So I'm turning to him again for his wisdom and his guidance to decode what the global situation is. Welcome, Dr. ElBaradei.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sreenivasan. And I would have prepared that we go together and play golf. That would have been much easier than talking about the world today. But it's a pleasure to be with you again.
I just want to read out a few lines from your acceptance speech. You said there, imagine what would happen if the nations of the world spent as much on development as on building the machines of war. Imagine a world where every human being would live in freedom and dignity. Imagine a world in which we would shed the same tears when a child dies in Darfur or Vancouver. Imagine a world where we would settle our differences through diplomacy and dialogue and not through bombs and bullets. Imagine if the only nuclear weapons remaining were the relics in our museums. Imagine that legacy we could leave to our children. Then you say, imagine that such a world is within our grasp. 20 years have passed since you said these words. Is this such a world still within our grasp?
Unfortunately, Srini, every word I've uttered 20 years ago is still with us. I don't think we have made any progress. I would say even we regressed quite a bit on every issue, which we mentioned, in terms of peaceful settlement of disputes, in terms of the arms race, in terms of existential threats like climate change, in terms of the frantic race to modernize nuclear arsenals. We are, I think, in a situation I haven't seen in my long life, I should say. At least even during that Cold War, there was some predictability. One would have understood what the other side would do. Right now, it's like a free for all. My worry is that the feeling now that you can get away with murder. International law, which I spent many years studying, is almost non-existent right now. And I don't know where, other than being depressed, I think we need to discuss how we move forward, because this situation clearly unsustainable, and it's dangerous, it's shameful, in fact, to leave that kind of world to our younger generations. I keep reminding myself that maybe I'm a bit pessimistic because I'm getting old, but it is not. I talk to young people, I talk to everybody from every walk of life, and the feeling is angst, as they say, and more than angst, the feeling that we are in a way doomed if we haven't changed course. And I would be happy, Srini, to talk with you some of the issues we need to work on. I believe the major issue, frankly, which we see today is inequity. Inequity between the North and the South, clearly, inequity even within societies, and the lack of trust. I mean, we are at a time when we only have one path to follow, which is international cooperation. I don't see any other way to solve any of our problems except through cooperation. The idea that we isolate China, that we de-risk India, that we, that the South is unhappy with NATO, all this, that is, nobody right now can win a war, a nuclear war. It's clear. The G20 declaration. And lots of talks about that Russia was not condemned. And if this is a victory, this has an impact on a war that's going in Europe for a year and a half. A war, full-fledged war in Europe, out of all places, and between two major nuclear weapon states, one directly and one indirectly. And nobody is talking about the obvious, which is a ceasefire at least and a dialogue. The UN is completely irrelevant. I hear Antonio Guterres last week saying, I have zero power. And all I have is I can raise my voice. Well, that doesn't give you really a great sense of assurance, a great sense of satisfaction. I mean, I think at least there are few things we need to do. We need to completely overhaul the multilateralism. Multilateralism is now at its lowest ebb. We need to change the rules. We need to change the procedure. The financial system, which many talks about, is as morally bankrupt. We need to change the Security Council clearly, both in terms of authority. You cannot just have the situation when you have a war and then Russia could easily veto, whatever, even a ceasefire. You cannot have a Security Council when a country like India, which is, 1/7 of the world population, is not a permanent member. We need to change the content. We need to change the procedure. We need to have a multilateral system that is adaptable for the 21st century. We need to agree at least on whether we have a democracy or autocracy. We need to save the planet. We need to spend enough money to save our planet and the climate change. Yesterday was the International Day for the total elimination of nuclear weapons.
Right.
And I look at it, and a lot of rhetoric. Everybody is writing a tweet or making a statement that we need to move toward a world free from nuclear weapons.
Who will move is the question. No, the paralysis of the UN that you just referred to is on account of a peculiar system where an aggressor can veto. In fact, that was not imagined at that time, that any permanent member will wage a war against a non-permanent member and veto everything. At that time, I believe there was some discussion that if such a thing happens, what will you do? And that permanent member should be excluded from voting. Some kind of a discussion took place. And then they said,
Correct.
We are responsible for world peace. Do you think we will attack anybody? And that is why that was not included. Now the main problem is nothing can pass from the Security Council because the affected person, the aggressor himself has the veto. Isn't that a fundamental problem?
It is a fundamental problem. I mean, under the charter, if you are a party to a dispute, you cannot vote, but that is only with regard to Chapter 6 and not Chapter 7, which is basically when you have an armed conflict.
Yeah.
This is a major flaw. I mean, the whole world is paralyzed because it just happened that you can, if you are a permanent member, you can have the cake and eat it, as they say. You can launch a war and you can block the Security Council. And if you have the Security Council is the only body responsible for the maintenance of international peace and security. When it comes to peace and security, it is the Security Council. This is the whole system is based on you have a central body that has to deal with peace and security. And that body right now is completely dysfunctional because, as you mentioned, because of structural issues, because of representational issues, and we have to come up to the plate and understand that nobody is winning from that situation. You saw the developing countries. You saw the developing countries' attitude to the Ukrainian war. There is, basically the message, I see it between the lines, it is not our war.
It affects the whole world, even if the war is far away. It does affect
the whole world, Srini. But if you talk to some of the developing countries, you will hear, where was the rule of law in Iraq? Where was the rule of law in Afghanistan, in Vietnam? I mean, it's, again, it touches on a much more deeper sense of inequity, unfairness, that, there are some rules for the goose and some other rules for the ganders, and so we need to take a global approach, a global look. How can we live together in the 21st century?
Mohammed, how do you see the G20 in Delhi? In fact, we tried to do that, bring the two sides together. We managed to get a consensus. There is a development of a global south which is taking more active action. Of course, these are still words. But is there any possibility of G20 acting like the Security Council? Because it's better represented, there is no veto, everybody is present, whoever is significant enough. In that situation, can G20's decisions be somehow accepted by the Security Council? Can it act like a negotiating body, which again then goes to the Security Council? Is that possible? Because Security Council expansion I do not see happening in a hurry. So can we have a machinery which is slightly different, G20 dealing with these issues and then going to the Security Council with a consensus? Is that possible?
Few things, Srini. One, that would really be an ad hoc mechanism to compensate for
the failure of the UN.
Security Council, UN. Secondly, I think what you have in the G20, the problem you will face is the same problem you will face in the Security Council. You have to get China, Russia, and the US, I mean, at least this big, to agree on the way forward. And of course, you as a representative of the South, making sure also you have the entire South behind you, which is also require a lot of work. But it could be at least an ad hoc forum for getting us out of the mess we have, and then maybe it's much more relaxed. It's than the Security Council. It doesn't have the structure of the Security Council. But then make sure also, Srini, that the G20 is perceived by the South that it represents really their interest, and it is not just the rich 20.
African Union is a member now. That is something that...
Yeah, but I know. But that is, I mean, people need to see that on the ground, frankly. I mean, as you said, there was a lot of good words. There's a lot of rhetoric, but people need to see the impact. Change of the financial system, need to see that some of the wars going on, for no senseless wars in the Middle East, in Yemen, in Libya, in Iraq, in Syria, they need to see concrete action, and they need to see that this is the result of cooperation, responsible cooperation among the major powers. So I look, again, you are the G20 chairman right now.
Right.
I think you need to challenge the major power, which, as I said, China, Russia, and the US at least, and with each one has its own allies, to make sure, let us show the world that even when the UN is still dysfunctional, we can we can act responsibly, and we can act and choose some of the issues. As I said, when possibly you can have an agreement. Climate change, financial system, some move on nuclear arms race. Create some forum for mediation on the Russian Ukraine war. This is, the people who are paying the price, other than the Ukrainian and the Russian, are all the developing countries where they cannot. The food is becoming short, expensive. So there is a lot you can do. I think, frankly, this is a historic opportunity for you, India, to show, A, that you really care about the global order, B, that you're still committed to the Gandhi's principle of nonviolence, that C, you are ready to listen to both represent the South, but also ready to listen to the major powers.
Well,
and you are a major
Russia
power.
and China are in the South now, aren't they? Even Russia and China are in the global South, they consider themselves to be. So in which case, it is quite possible that the West could also join a consensus of the South. That is probably the ideal situation, I think.
We all live in the same planet, and we all need to save our planet and to save ourselves. Our priorities are different. Objectives sometimes are different, but I think we share the same objective, that we need to leave a world for our children that is safer, that is human dignity.
What are the salient points that you think will work in the favor of humanity in the future? Climate change, we don't know. Artificial intelligence, as you yourself said, is considered to be a threat. So what is it that, of course, UN expansion, Security Council expansion is one solution, but that is not going to happen. So where do you find this glimmer of hope for the world?
I find a glimmer of hope in the young people, Srini, your children and my children, that do not share our views on many issues, that they would like to live in equity, in dignity, in peace. So I'm hoping that, of course, the law of nature, they will take over soon, but we have a responsibility to deliver to them a world that is sustainable.
And speaking of the younger generation, I remember you also said in your speech that your children and my children are not wedded to any particular geographical, religious, or any kind of commitment. They see the world differently than we do. Is that a reality? Is it going to help because they are not narrow-minded nationalism or religion, etc.? We don't see in our children because they see the world as a free, the atmosphere to work. Is that the hope that you are speaking about?
And I know about same with your children. They don't really care about color, race, religion, ethnicity.
Exactly.
For them, it is people. For them, it is friends. I see a lot, Srini, of discrimination. I see a lot of nationalism, and this is something I should say. I mean, what I see sometimes coming out of India is not really great. Secularism, the feeling that, equity is really a very important message, should go out from everywhere. We need to invest in education. We need to invest in people to be exposed. The social media, of course, has been helping a lot on that. I mean, everybody knows that what it looks like in the other side of the fence, and that's helping. Forget about all this information coming out of the social media, but the social media, I think, in my experience, is helping a lot of the young generation to understand that at the end of the day, we are one and the same. No, absolutely zero difference.
Still, we have terrorist problems. We have problems with, groups in Canada working against India, creating terrorist problems and, creating a kind of situation where bilateral relations have been affected between India and Canada. Do you have a comment to make on that?
I hope that this whole issue of terrorism is dealt with in a more objective way. Of course, the due process should take precedent, but we need to, in addition to dealing with symptoms of terrorism, we need to deal with the causes of terrorism. We have a lot of terrorism in the Middle East, as you know, but we need to understand why this is happening. I hope this issue between India and Canada would be resolved in accordance with the law, in accordance with due process. And as I said, I don't really know the details, but it doesn't help us, to see two democracies, India and Canada, getting into this kind of situation. It doesn't help anybody.
So that is a separate issue rather than the iniquity that we are talking about, isn't it? So
yeah,
the government of Canada has a responsibility to restrain it instead of saying that we cannot help because this is freedom of expression.
I was very, in fact, proud to see how the Indians are providing the vehicle for development in Canada in many ways, Right. And I hope to see that restored.
Yeah.
I hope to see that restored. I mean, one thing as I said, I always talk about, I always admire how the Indians are everywhere leading the charge, whether it's in the technology, whether it's the US, wherever you go, there is a clever Indian doing something constructive. And I hope that will continue, Srini.
Thank you very much, Mohamed, for this conversation, for taking off your time.
Thank you very much, Srini, for having me. Thanks.
Thank you. All the very best. That brings us to the conclusion of the special program, Man of Peace, Nobel Laureate ElBaradei Speaks. We dealt with a number of international issues and came to the conclusion that we have much more to do, all regions. And he particularly stressed the role of India in dealing with many issues in the world. Thank you for watching this special program. Bye-bye.
If you like this video, please like, share and subscribe to our channel.